In a world of constant change and innovation, trust is key, knowledge is power, and the inside track is everything. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bruce Whitfield.
Hello everybody, welcome to Inside Track. Makhosini Ndlovu is with us. He is the head of residential development finance at FNB Commercial. And this idea of these massive residential property developments, we're seeing a surprising number of them come out. All of the data is showing that properties below, say, 3.5 million are moving nicely. And there's a huge incentive at the moment, is there not, Makhosini, in terms of actually carrying out these sorts of developments?
You're right, Bruce. I think in the sort of, past few years, we have seen a huge, uptick, in that market. And obviously, I think what has influenced that is that the interest rates have remained very low. Also, the working from home has also helped, and also the semi-migration. So ordinarily, in some of our coastal towns where we haven't seen business for some time, we're starting to see new developments coming up. And definitely, I think if you had to sort of, go and invest money, in the residential property, in the residential space, that is where you should be playing. Definitely, there's an uptick, and from an FNB point of view, we're bullish in that market, and that's why we're going to keep on playing.
The vast majority of us have had a mortgage, at least at some point in time. We understand how the individual mortgage works. How does it work on industrial scale, if you like, when it comes to actually funding developments, this idea of residential development finance?
So essentially on our side, our model is we provide short-term finance to property developers, and essentially it's for two things. You find some developers will go and service a stand, and some of the developers, they'll buy land, service the stand, and after that, they'll come to us for top structure development. And what happens is that when those end products are finished, they get sold into an open market. And it can be sold maybe as a secondary title unit or as a freehold, asset. So definitely, I think in the mortgage space, in the individual stuff, it's individuals, buying it, where you go and finance an individual. But in this case, your takeout is the pre-sales, that you get at the end of, when the assets have been developed. Yeah.
So talk to me then as to how the financing works, some general rules, if you like.
So essentially, how the finance will work is, from an FNB point of view, if we were to look at it ordinarily, the client usually, gives about 20% equity, and that equity is in the form of land and a bit of some cash. From an FNB point of view, we usually give between 60 up to about 80%, depending with the type of product. And how it works is that the client goes and identifies land, and after identifying land, they do their feasibility study. And in that feasibility study, there's a number of things that get into account. And firstly is to go and look at the market to say, which market do you want to sort of serve? Firstly, the market, you go and look at, to say in that area, are there any bulk that is available? And when you speak of bulk, you're speaking of water, sewer, electricity, and also the amenities in the area. I think that is quite key. Are there any schools? Are there any hospitals? Are there any shopping centers? And from an FNB point of view, also when we do our due diligence, those are some of the things that we look into. And obviously, I think after that, if we're happy with the deal, the client puts in his first equity in, that is the 20%, and FNB will come with the 80% when the client has put in their equity. That is how we look at the deals, sort of at high level. Yeah.
Chicken and egg situation. What leads development? Is it the fact that there's a residential development and suddenly commercial property developers come along and build shopping centers and somebody then pops a school nearby? What comes first?
So in the market, what has always led in this space, it has always been resi. So what you find in all your townships that develop, the first thing that comes through is residential development. Then the shopping centers start coming in, because in order for you to put a shopping center, you need feet. And you need guys to sort of, come and buy, and you put a shopping center close to where the community has been built. So in the developments that we have done, in some instances, we have gone in areas that are sort of, untapped, where there isn't any amenities. Then over time, you start seeing those amenities coming through. And also what the developers have done, over time, is that some of them, they might be specializing in the resi part, but when they start doing the zoning of the land, they always create, commercial, stands. And they go into partners with the guys that do the commercial stuff. maybe be it a school, be it a hospital, be it a shopping center, be it a fuel station. So what you find is that when they package, the entire stuff, there's a resi portion, then there's a commercial portion. But what always leads is always the resi portion. You put in a number of houses in there, and over time, then that starts igniting, the commercial piece here.
But when you look at residential financing, I mean, I'm sure there are two parts. You'll finance the land differently to perhaps the actual construction project. Are there two separate contracts? How does that work?
For sure. So if I maybe I can separate it. So you find that some of the developers will go and finance the land and the infrastructure. Then they will sell those pieces where the client comes in and he builds their own top structure. But what you find in the sectional target space, what we do from an FNB point of view is that we will finance the top structure. The client goes and sources the land, then they check the land through zoning. After that, then they go and service the land. We sometimes participate in the servicing of the land, depending on sort of how the numbers work. And in those cases, we finance the top structure, on those deals here.
I suppose Steyn City is the classic example of this massive golf course residential lifestyle development, which is plonked at the end of William Nicol, except William Nicol doesn't go far enough, so the developers end up having to pay for the road. And then if the municipality isn't run particularly effectively, they might need to then run their own articulation for water and for electricity, and to get the services in, and of course all the waste out. Is that then becoming more of a norm in a municipal environment which isn't as efficient as it should be?
Absolutely, Bruce. If I can look at it, I think some of the issues that are there at the moment is that when you start looking at some of the municipalities, the decay that is happening, and for our developers, I think they see opportunities. So they're starting to participate in also, providing some of those external services, and also seeing how they can perhaps maybe help, some of these councils, because at any given point in time, I think, human beings need a place to stay. So as a developer, also the question for me is that how do I make sure that I enable, the product that I need to produce? If it means, perhaps going an extra mile in trying to help the council, by all means, we're seeing that, time and time happening, where guys sort of, are going an extra mile. They're no longer leaving the stuff, to sort of these municipalities, because one, also the skills trade, and also sort of, the decay. So our guys are going an extra mile to making sure that the internal service and also the external service, they're now starting to contribute more. And obviously, I think through that, we start, improving the communities, that the guys live in. And also what the guys are doing is that even after doing the developments, they are continuously trying to sort of, plow back into those developments to make sure that, those communities get sort of, maintained here.
But does not add then to the overall cost of the project, of course. You've suddenly got to build in a chunk on top in terms of actually having to, there's less to spend on development and finishes and making the place fantastic. You're actually just doing the basics that a local government department should be doing as a matter of course.
Look, I think there's that element, in terms of, adding a bit of some cost. But if you look at it clinical, is that for any development to take place, the developer first has to go and acquire land. So the holding cost is either you stay with your land for the next 5-10 years and you've got holding costs, or you accelerate the development. And obviously, if you look at it from an opportunity cost point of view, it's either you live with the land for 10 years, or perhaps you accelerate the development and get the upside. Yeah. So when you look at it, combined, the opportunity cost of you perhaps maybe putting in an extra sort of, funds and finishing the development as opposed to holding it for quite some time. The opportunity cost, if you start outweighing it, I think in order for you to put that extra funds in, it helps, because it means that you get to realize, your profits early.
Then talk to me about how the loans are repaid, because the structure of these loans is really important. You can't be building on the never and ever, or, as you say, waiting a decade for the services to be delivered. You want everything done as neatly, as quickly, and as efficiently as possible, so that you can get the builders off site and the residents in. So
if you speak to, if I speak on the traditional residential developments, your loans get repaid through pre-sales, and our simple definition of pre-sales is an individual goes and buys a unit, he goes and secures, finance with whatever institutions. From an FNB point of view, whatever development we get into, we usually take 30% of the number of units as a quantum. And that individual, depending whether there's a requirement for a deposit, ordinarily there's about a 5% deposit. That is the traditional stuff where, after, you've secured enough pre-sales. And how our pre-sales work, from an FNB point of view, depending with the liquidity of the product, we usually range between 100% to 120% of the loan. Maybe put it as an example, if I give a loan of 100 million, it means that our pre-sales have to be 100 million as well, or 120 million. That is the traditional side, that the loan, as soon as you finish those units and they start transferring to individual families, then, your loan gets repaid. But what we're finding as well is that your developers at the moment, as compared to maybe in the past, they've realized that, each and every time for them to build a balance sheet, instead of continuously selling the units, that become your profit and you take the funds and use them for something else. What the guys are coming up is called what we're calling a blended kind of residential development, where they will take the units, we give them a loan, they go and secure enough pre-sales to repay us. And the residual of the units, they keep them, on a long-term basis. And from an FNB point of view, what we do is that on those residual units, we put them in a product called the rental stock, where we fund them over a 10-year period. And obviously, I think if you start looking at it clinically, is that for a developer, there's an upside because one, they're earning the rentals, but more importantly, also the capital appreciation. Because what you find is that in the olden days, that developers, they make a profit on each unit, maybe for an example, they make about 20 or 30,000. If you look at it from an inflation point of view, those funds, you might use them for another development, but then it's not even building any balance sheet. I think that is the issue that we've always had with the developers, where they're not building any balance sheet. But our developers have become clever now because they also want to participate in these schemes. They're starting to build their balance sheet. And the more they do it, and obviously, I think then they start building a balance sheet, then they can start running, proper businesses, as opposed, just always running these things up and time again and moving on.
We've all hired a builder at some point, some of us more often than others, who has not done the job as we would have liked them to have done it. And these developers, of course, do lots of contracting out of services and stuff, and they have their plumbers that they trust, their electricians that they trust, and they come in. But things go wrong on building sites. There is, of course, always delivery risk as to whether or not a project's going to be completed on time. It could be as a result of weather delays, strike action, it could be anything. And I suppose we've learned a lot about delivery risk, something we'd never contemplated perhaps before January, February 2020, and that is what happens in the case of a pandemic. That must have wrought absolute havoc in this industry.
No, you're right. So if you speak of delivery risk, I think maybe if we can cast our minds back, I think just the property boom before the crash, what banks used to do is that I think also some of us, we got excited. Would any guy become a developer, someone is a lawyer, then over time, because there's that market, we become developers. And obviously, I think that's where maybe the term, packy builders came from. But what we ignored there is that we're only seeing, the end to say, we just give the guys the funds, then they go and develop, and that is where the delivery risk, came in. Because what we found is that, most of the projects were not delivered on time, and the projects that got delivered were shoddy, or perhaps maybe the guys didn't even have any experience. So from an FNB point of view at the moment, I think the guys that we deal with is guys that are credible. So for any developer to engage into any sort of development, I usually sometimes joke with my clients when they come in and they say they want to do a development. The first thing that I ask them is that, have you ever perhaps maybe embarked on building your own house? When you run the numbers, they look nice, but when you start getting into that nitty-gritties, there's a lot of things, that go in there. So from an FNB point of view, we usually say that we deal with developers that have got about 5 years experience. And also, without the experience, if you're going to develop a product, we always make sure that we deal with guys that have developed a similar product in the past. You've got developers that play in the affordable housing space. You've got developers that play in the sweet spot. You've got guys that do, premium stuff. So we always make sure that, when you come in, you should have done that kind of, product. And obviously, I think that has helped, from a delivery point of view. And in terms of, I think the unrest, that happened, recently, and also I think COVID, it definitely delayed some of the projects. But I think the beauty is that when you deal with guys that know, they're always happy to navigate, firstly, and also because we deal with guys that have got balance sheets, those cost overruns, they're able to absorb them, because that is always a risk. When we assess our deals, we need to make sure that we put a bit of some cushion, we put some stresses in there to make sure that if ever there's any warp in the market, the guys can absorb them. So for me, I think from an FNB point of view, I think while we see, all these sort of, negatives in terms of the unrest and also COVID, but I think because of the guys that we deal with, that have done it, time and time again, there's a huge upside, and all the developments that we have done thus far are being delivered on time, and it's quite exciting for us.
And I suppose the rats and mice get shaken out in times of crisis when they just fail to deliver and they can't adapt. It's just it's a sort of a Darwinian exercise of only the strong survive, and ultimately probably the sector is going to be better off for it. Finally, I mean, if you've got to give me a short list of the things that you would be looking at. The old-fashioned adage of location, location, location is absolutely everything. You've got to then, I suppose, have a checklist of absolutely everything that is required before you're going to sign off on a loan to a developer, no matter who that developer is. What is the short list of things you need to know?
So there's a couple of things that to look at, but if I do sort of, look at the short list, I think the jockey is quite key. We need to understand the individual, that is doing that development, because that will be our go-to guy. We need to make sure that he's got enough experience in terms of doing the development, as I've alluded to it. The next one is we go and look at the professional team. Who are the guys, who's the contractor, who's the architect, who are the engineers, coming into this development. Do the guys really understand, and they've done any developments, of that nature? So when you look at that, the experience of the developer, including that of the professionals, I think it takes away the delivery risk. Then we start going in and to say, these sort of, uncertainties that we have mentioned in terms of, the unrest, in terms of COVID, in terms of, shortages of supplies, that might push the cost out. Then we go and look at, the jockey's financial strength. Does he have the balance sheet and also the cash to throw in if ever there's any cost overruns? That becomes key for us. Then if we've ticked those boxes, we start going on to the product to say, the product that is being delivered, what is the liquidity of this product? From an FNB point of view, we usually want to play in that sweet spot market, between 750 to about maybe 1.5, and maybe pushing it hard to about sort of, 2 million. We usually find that market is quite fluid because there's a lot of buyers in that market. Then also some of the stuff that we usually look into is to say, at what price are you building in per square meter compared to the other products in the same sort of, community? What are the amenities in that area? Also when you start looking at the finishes, in as much as, I think any person, that goes and buys a unit, I think the finishes and the quality of the product becomes key. We have seen, some developers, one of the reasons why, that development is usually sell very fast is, how they play around with the finishes, how they perhaps maybe utilize the space, in terms of the development. So all those things, we sort of, look at it. And after looking at that, definitely, if there's a deal to be done, then we proceed with the deal.
Makhosini Ndlovu, thank you very much. Wonderful insights to bring us to the end of this particular segment. The head of residential development finance at FNB, Makhosini Ndlovu. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode. We look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.